Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. Trinway Silks is where weavers, spinners, knitters, and stitchers find the silk they love. Select from the largest variety of silk spinning fibers, silk yarn, and silk threads and ribbons at trinwaysilks.com. You'll discover a rainbow of colors thoughtfully hand-dyed in Colorado. Love natural? Trinway's array of wild silks provide choices beyond white. If you love silk, you'll love Trinway Silks, where superior quality and customer service are guaranteed.
Hi, I'm Melissa, and I've worked at the Yarn Barn of Kansas for over 30 years. If you've called to place an order or ask a question about weaving, you've probably talked with me. Here at the Yarn Barn, we're all weavers, so we can answer questions about weaving techniques and make product recommendations. Visit yarnbarn-ks.com, call 800-468-0035, or check out our tutorials on YouTube. We'd love to help you.
I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Ann Merrow. Tom Knisely has been weaving and spinning since he was just a youngster, and he has a passion for historic textiles. He's a beloved teacher and writer. Well, Tom, thanks so much for being with me.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me to do this. This is a lot of fun. And I think we're going to have some fun with our podcast.
We are. We are here in Pennsylvania at Weave Together, which is kind of a place I associate with you. You have a lot of roots in weaving in this area. Is that right?
That is exactly right. I have been here. Well, I grew up here all my life, but it really sort of started also not too far from here in Adams County, which is the adjacent county to us. And there's where my career started at the Mannings Hand Weaving School and Supply Center. And I started going there when I was 14 years old. And
wow.
I bought an antique spinning wheel and I wanted to know how to use it. And the antique dealer that I bought it from actually said, if you go to the Mannings Hand Weaving School just down in Adams County, they can give you supplies and maybe some books to get you started on this. We think this spinning wheel is actually workable. And it was. And they were very, very gracious. And here is this, just enthusiastic young kid walking through the door. They were very, very friendly and very good to me. And so I walked out with a bag of flax and a bag of wool and Elsie Davenport's book, Your Hands Spinning, and started going through there. And I taught myself to spin on this wheel. Did all the wrong things. I had 2 drive bands instead of continuous one. I mean,
it works.
It worked. It was a little harder maybe to control it, but I was making thread and I thought, what am I going to do with this thread? And I thought about the Mannings and all those looms. And so I just kept going back and buying more materials and thinking, man, I wonder how I could make this part of my continual life goals and journey, and never knew that soon after graduating from high school that I would start working there. And I spent 37 years there.
Oh, wow.
Yes, through Mr. and Mrs. Manning and then Carol and Ron Woolcock.
When I think about what could have gone wrong, I mean, there are so many antique stores selling spinning wheel-shaped objects that don't actually make yarn. So not only was it remarkable that you walked into this store and said, I, 14-year-old boy, want that thing.
Right.
That thing turned out to work.
Yeah, exactly. All the pieces were there. You get to this stage of my life and I look back there and go like, all these things fell into place perhaps for a reason. And so the universe opened up and said, this spinning wheel is just what he needs. And so, my parents were older when they had me and they were interested in history and antiques. And so because of that, I always sort of associated spinning wheels with something that is antique and old-timey. But it was such a crucial part to everybody's existence years ago, and everybody had a spinning wheel. So I thought, gosh, if I'm going to start collecting antiques like my parents, I really ought to have a spinning wheel.
Oh.
And there you go. There was the right spinning wheel for the right enthusiastic kid. And it was just a marriage made in heaven.
But you were looking at things that were functional. You weren't looking at the fancy parlor antiques.
No, exactly. And so, and you know what? I really think it's important to go out and demonstrate in front of people. And the reason I'm coming around to this is my parents took me also in Pennsylvania to the famous Kutztown Folk Festival.
Of course.
It's 2 weeks of living Pennsylvania German folk culture being shown, demonstrated. People are quilting, people are doing other things. And I remember going there. I must have been 6 or 7 years of age. And they took me into a building, and here is this ancient, elderly old woman weaving on a barn frame loom.
Wow.
And she's weaving essentially like a coverlet panel. And I watched her weaving on this. And my parents went off and they did other things. They came back. I'm still standing there asking questions and watching the patterns grow and to see the pretty little flowers develop as she threw the shuttle and things. And now at this stage in my life, I look back and thought, oh, I thought she was ancient. She was probably 52, you know. But I was just intrigued with it because throwing that pattern thread and then the tabby and watching her feet go down below and the swinging of the beater and that rhythmical thump of the beater coming up against, it's just mesmerizing. So.
And coverlets turned out to be something that you have been passionate about for a long time.
Oh my gosh, yes. And love going to antique shops, looking for new ones, seeing maybe even a similar pattern like the wig rose, I think everybody is very familiar with. How people put the colors together and realizing that, oh, if you have a coverlet that is a wig rose threading and it's coming out of New England, it might be indigo dyed wool, but it's all blue. And yet you get into this sort of central part of the Atlantic coast. There you might find 2 colors. You might find the indigo blue, but also with the madder red. And then you go down south and you find that sometimes they're putting 3 and 4 pattern colors into their coverlets. So you can almost regionalize where these coverlets might have come from. But I do want to tell everybody about a real huge mistake I made. And I went to a reputable antique show, one that's really well known here on the East Coast. And there is this beautiful overshot coverlet and it's fuchsia. And I'm looking at it thinking, oh, everything about this is correct. I'm looking at the warp threads and the tabby threads and their singles linen and the weft thread look like it was hand spun for sure, but it's fuchsia. What I didn't know is my interest in coverlets are gravitating toward the indigo blue, the madder reds, those colors. This was a tremendous coverlet. It was probably woven in the South, in Southern Appalachia, where they used lichens. And they had the know-how to extract that purple dye from lichens. And later on, I realized, man, I really messed up there. I should have brought on that coverlet because it's a great example. Yeah. But I don't know, with 3 little girls, I had enough pinks and fuchsias in my life. So I passed that up regretfully.
Right.
Now. Yeah.
So is there a particular time period that you're tending to look at?
You know, I like anything from is probably mid 1700s up into the turn of the century, going from 1899 into 1900. But I find it's a fascinating time in history, especially in hand weaving. And when you think about who was weaving at that time, a lot of time professional weavers were men. And then you start crossing over into the next century and you're finding that there are loom manufacturers that are showing up making smaller looms and they are making looms that are a little bit more portable. So now the shift has gone from men who are professional weavers to women who are taking this on as a great leisure activity.
Wow.
And so now you can get a Maycomber loom coming into like the 1920s, 1930s, being made in Massachusetts and then eventually in Maine. But yeah, there's a shift going on. And in the 1920s and 30s, then we have people like Mary Atwater coming to the surface, Ozma Gallinger, Bertha Gray Hayes. And like in Bertha Gray Hayes, here's a sweet little Structo table loom.
Yeah.
Well, that table loom we would have never found in the 18th and 19th century, but it's making pretty fabric and it's a fun thing. And they don't necessarily have to have an entire coverlet. They're really pleased to be able to make things like placemats.
Right.
We all probably have placemats at home, but it's really a modern invention. Years ago, you would have had nothing on your table or you would have had a tablecloth. But the idea of having a small mat under your plate was really a 20th century invention. And we could do it like out of summer and winter or overshot and making something pretty. And hats off to all these women who revived those coverlet patterns and reduced them in size so they were more to the right size rather than taking a big blooming leaf and then, which was great for a coverlet proportionally, but then reducing it down into maybe like a 40 thread repeat that looks great as a table runner.
So I think probably for weavers, certainly Mary Meigs Atwater and possibly Bertha Gray Hayes, but the other name that you mentioned, Ozma Ballinger?
Ozma Gallinger. Ozma Gallinger started her career in Heartland, Michigan. And she had some family back in Pennsylvania. Her husband was originally from Pennsylvania. They moved from Heartland, Michigan to the Gettysburg area. And then he made looms. He was well known for the Gallinger loom, which she and her husband designed and built as a counterbalance loom. Some of the listeners who are going to listen to this, they say, oh, yeah, I remember the Gallinger loom. But we have a lot of people who enjoy weaving on a jack loom. And so counterbalance looms really sort of fell out of favor. But Ozma Gallinger, after her husband passed away, sold the business to Harry and Catherine Manning. And they are the ones who started the Mannings hand weaving school in East Berlin, Pennsylvania, which is just like the next rock's throw distance away from Gettysburg.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now a word from our sponsors. Imagine weaving over, under on a simple loom with a rainbow of yarns. Tapestry weaving's simple structure lets you weave almost any image you can dream up. Rebecca Mezoff, author of the bestseller The Art of Tapestry Weaving, will teach you how to weave your own ideas, designs, and adventures. Join Rebecca and thousands of online students around the world and make your ideas come alive in fiber. Visit tapestryweaving.com to start your first online class today. And now back to the show. You know, it's interesting to me that the first fibers that you started working with were linen and wool, which are, you know, linen is not the most common fiber to spin now. It's certainly one of the most important for something like a coverlet.
Right. But that's what they sold at the Mannings. That was available. And of course, I had been reading about textiles and, you know, the processing of planting that seed in the spring and then going through that whole long, rigorous processing to make it into fiber. And things start clicking when you think about, oh, yeah, I remember reading about and hearing Claude Debussy, Girl with Flaxen Hair. Oh, this beautiful, long, blonde hair. Yes, it does resemble flax. And when you spin flax, then you get linen. And from there, people clothe themselves with it. It seemed like that was such an important part of everybody's existence, that you had a flax growing for every member of the family. Yeah.
But the difference between knowing something, I find this quite a lot as someone who used to edit books. The difference between knowing something intellectually and knowing it with your fingers is great.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I'm a great believer that you have got to dive in and do this so you really understand how this works. Because yes, it's one thing to read this, but when you actually physically get your hands involved with this and you start making that and twisting it into threads and trying it for yourself. Today, I don't have to have a coverlet. I don't have to weave a coverlet. I don't have to do big things. I'm finding I'm doing a lot more sampling because I'm frankly interested in knowing, how does this new structure that I came across actually work? And I'll put a 10-inch wide warp on it and I'll just keep playing with it until I intellectually understand how it works and maybe all the other things that I can do with that. But you've got to be a hands-on type person. And even as a spinner, spin that flax so you really understand how it works.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that in some ways you were very self-taught as a young person. A lot of the people that you teach now, first of all, they're learning in person from you. But secondly, they're adult learners who are maybe not as familiar with not knowing how to do something.
Correct. You know, as we're talking about this, I'm just thinking, I've collected antique textiles for a long time, and we're talking about linen. When I look at what is available to us as consumers of threads today, and the linen threads, you say, oh, they have 5-2 and 10-2, 22. 22, size 20, 2 strands plied together. Sometimes you'll find yarn sales that are offering singles, so 21. But people are a little hesitant in using it. Yet if I look back into those antique textiles, nobody took the time to ply it. We
Yes.
spun it as a singles. We wove with singles linen in the warp and weft direction. And they clothed themselves with yards and yards and yards of this linen. Why are we so afraid of it?
Wow, that is well, and with linen, okay, it's a nice long staple, so it's not going to fray or fall apart if you use
Correct.
it as singles. But I was speaking with Norman Kennedy, he was weaving a set of wedding blankets,
Mhm.
which were singles wool warp, which you would not think was something that is done.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I will never, and we're talking about singles, whether
Mhm.
it's wool or whether it's linen. And I will never forget, as a beginning weaver, somebody came to me and said, you know what, Tom, I know you want to try linen, but I would avoid it. You're going to have lots of problems with this,
Hmm.
tension problems. And they really discouraged me. And I thought, well, why? Found out later on that that guild member who discouraged me had taken a workshop
Mhm.
with a well-known weaver, and you had to warp your loom at home and bring it to the workshop.
Oh.
And what they had warped their loom with was table looms. Now, linen is very stiff and is not very forgiving.
Hmm.
And so I thought about that, and I thought, the distance between the front breast beam of the loom and the back beam of that loom is probably maybe 20, 24 inches.
Hmm.
And it's a jack loom. So here you are with these little levers on the side, and you're clanking this and trying to get that shed to open to get a shuttle through. And you're stretching that linen thread, and you're having a lot of problems with that. Obviously, that's where the problem lies.
Sure.
Norman Kennedy works on big barn frame looms.
Hmm.
If I put this on a Glamocra loom or any other sort of larger loom that was typical of 18th, 19th century, they're 6 feet
Hmm.
from the breast beam to the back. And they were often either counterbalance looms or countermarch looms. So you're taking half of those warp threads and drawing them up and drawing the other half down with this counter action. There's no strain on the thread. It wove like a charm.
Hmm.
So the idea is that if you're weaving with linen, put it on a floor loom. Do not put it on a table loom. You won't have any trouble. So I don't
Right.
want to discourage anybody. Go out there and just buy a spool of linen thread and try it. I think you're going to fall in love with it. And use it wet. Don't be
Yeah.
afraid to dampen that linen down, and you'll have no trouble at all.
Well, I'm a rigid heddle weaver, and people definitely discourage rigid heddle weavers from using linen
Mhm.
because not only are only half of them going up, but the same half are also going down.
Right.
So it's challenging, but I think that's what cotton is for.
That's exactly right. I love it. And if you want to use linen, let's put cotton warp on that rigid heddle and then use linen for the weft.
Mhm.
And you're golden. You're not going to have any trouble at all.
So you have certainly studied a lot of coverlets, but another thing that I know that you are passionate about is rugs
Mhm.
and rug structures. Can you tell me a little bit about why you like weaving rugs and the styles that you have come across?
I like the physical beating of that rug. There's just something satisfying about throwing that weft across and grabbing a hold of that beater and just beating it really hard back against itself. And I like exploring all different kinds. So sometimes I'll do a weft-faced rug where the warping is so simple. I mean, you're working at 4 and 5 ends to the inch to get it on the loom, but the number of picks per inch might be 40 or 50 picks per inch. Very slow weaving, but how those threads are interacting with one another, whether you're doing a twill or summer and winter weave structure, I just love that. But then on the flip side of it, I'll take the time to warp up for a warp-faced rug where I might be using the same materials, but now condensing it that it's working at 24, 32, 36 ends to the inch. And it's fast weaving. The time I've put in is all in the warping process, and the weaving, I now only have maybe 4 or 5 picks per inch. And so it builds up and weaves very, very quickly. But there's just something satisfying about having this sturdy rug and having it come off and put on the floor and enjoy it for years and years.
I think sometimes it can be difficult for people. I mean, as hard as it is to get people to use your kitchen towels that you've woven. Getting them to put something on the floor and walk on it is just...
It's even harder yet. Yeah. Well, I think you just sort of have to sort of judge who's going to do that. But
Right.
yeah. And weaving rag rugs. I know a lot of people love weaving rag rugs, and they'll probably agree with me. There's just something satisfying about taking an old sheet and tearing it into strips and then reweaving it. And I was telling my class this morning, we were talking about rug finishes and also things veer into other topics. And I love getting my grandchildren out in the middle of the yard, taking an old flannel sheet and some dye and just letting them Jackson Pollock the entire thing, throw it in the washing machine. And then the satisfaction of tearing those strips. Oh my gosh, to hear that rip is just, they giggle and laugh, and it just makes my heart happy.
Well, and I think that then, and hopefully now, first of all, the pleasure of doing something with your hands, but secondly, the pleasure of finding value in something that is essentially valueless, worse than valueless for, things that you have to find a way to get rid of these days.
Oh, I agree with you. But, I'm just geeky enough that I love finding an old rag rug that's falling apart and then looking at the interior of those rags and going, oh, yeah, I remember this was a fabric that was really popular in the 1920s. And people used it for quilting, or you look at it and you see that it's just an old ticking fabric from a bed.
Right.
And say, yeah, I recognize that. And this fabric is a twill. And you realize the family just took old clothes and cut them up and recycled them and made something useful out of it.
Yeah.
They're just like an archaeologist. You're digging in there to find out what it was all made out of.
And that's something that people do all over. I know that one of the classes that you've taught this week is sakiori and zanshiori, which are reuse, repurposed textiles.
Yes. And I love that idea. When you take dish towel warps off and you've got all those beautiful colors from the dish towels, it hurts me to take those threads and just throw them in the trash. Right. And I know some listeners are going to say, well, he has more time on his hands than he knows what to do with. But there's something satisfying about sitting in the chair at night. You've got a cat on your lap and you've got a whole lap full of thrums. And they could be anywhere from, 18 inches long. Maybe some of them are a little shorter. But I'm tying the ends together with just a simple overhand knot, nothing special, but just tying a light color to a dark color and a blue to something nice and warm like an orange. And don't think too hard about it, but just tie them all together and then reweave them. And when I found out about this technique zanshiori, which is the leftover thread weaving, I had to laugh and giggle. I'm thinking, for all these years that I've taught people to be very careful on when they're ending a bobbin and starting a new one, to take your ends, maybe tear the thread down, taper your ends and overlap it so you do not even see where the join is. Now, and I am tying thousands of knots, reweave them, and where one knot was a mistake, now thousands of them are a pattern, and they're just beautiful. So let's just sort of celebrate the imperfections in it. And it's really fun to run your hand over and see all those knots. And yeah, I love it.
I know of a partnership between a weaver and an embroiderer, where the weaver, who's also a dyer, finishes up, and she has, sometimes 24 inches of each of these yarns. Well, for embroidery, that's way more than you need.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, they might be even a little too long for something like that. But yeah, that's a zanshiori weaver's dream, is to find all those threads and tie them into little knots and just go with it. And you know what? Isn't it nice to find something in life where they can say, there's no wrong?
Right. That's true.
Somebody's always out there ready to point their finger at you and say, you shouldn't do it this way. Well, however it comes out, and it's just all serendipitous and just great. Celebrate it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also a justification, maybe because I started off as a spinner and a knitter where you use up almost every yard. But putting on something in the warp that I care about, it's a little bit of a wrench to put on a hand-spun warp and think, that's going to wind up on the floor. So if you can find another use for it, because, it can be, you can use it more than once, or if you find a precious yarn that has more than one life.
That's true. It's nice. As a matter of fact, I'm working on a future project for Kate Larson at Spinoff, and I'm spinning cotton right now. And cotton spinning sometimes it's a challenge. I love it, but I'm going to be weaving with it.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's going to be all these thrums coming out of that. And so right now I'm sort of playing, do I just take the thrums and make it into Zanchiori and have all the little knots? Or do I put a dummy warp on so I can just sort of ease those little knots through the heddles and work it as close as possible?
Yeah.
While we're talking about this, and I think listeners are going to ask themselves, does he maybe sometimes put knots in the warp as well? Because we all end up with little bits of 8-2 cotton or whatever you're working with, and you hate to throw it out. So sometimes I'll just make a completely random warp with 15, 20 colors in it. And when the thread runs out as I'm warping, I'll tie a new color into it and tie a knot. And so the knots can fall within the warp, and I don't worry about it. Not like in the old days where I always put my knots at the very ends. So this warp might have many, many knots in it. So I thought, all right, I'm going to put this to the test. I'm celebrating our knots in our Zanchiori.
Right.
But typically the Japanese have a smooth warp and they're only weaving with that. I'm going to put it on as a warp. So I took very small, like a little Dorset loom with flat steel heddles on it, very sharp little eyes on those flat steel heddles, and beamed a 10-yard warp that was full of knots. You know what? It beamed on. Really? I opened up a tabby shed, and as it's going through, I go front to back. It went through the reed because the shed was open. So only half the threads needed to they were not crunching together as they're going through the dents in the reed, but they went through the reed just fine. They went through the heddle eyes just fine. We beamed it on. And in the entire process of weaving 10 yards of dish towels, I had one broken thread. And guess what I did? I tied a knot, Anne.
Oh, you didn't fiddle around with a T-pen?
No weights off the back or anything. You just tied another knot in there and just kept going with it. And dang, the fabric was beautiful.
That is so interesting. I would have thought that it would fray and catch and...
Oh my gosh.
Do you have a magic knot?
No, just like a little overhand knot. Now, you know what? If you use a square knot, it's much flatter.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take the time to tie that. I just tie an overhand knot with it. So it worked out just fine. And I thought, if I'm going to put it onto a loom, I'm going to test this with like all the possible problems that we're going to have with the heddles and everything. And it worked out just fine.
Wow. I don't know if I'm that bold. But...
Yeah, you know what? It's a different way to try to get your head around, isn't it?
It is. It is. I mean, I guess that's what sampling's for, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, one of the things that I know you for is teaching. And when you come into a classroom, there are people who learn in all kinds of different styles who are having all kinds of different days. But you're known for your warmth and patience as a teacher.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you think that these two things, that your personality and your passion for weaving, have just come together? Or is that something that you've practiced over time?
I think some of it is the God-given. I think I was meant to be a teacher from the very beginning. I wasn't capable of going off to college or university, but my parents, I credit them for a lot of this because my parents had a business where I was expected to work within that business. And so from the time I was just a little kid, 8, 10 years of age, I was taught to interact with adults. And sometimes in any kind of retail situation, you get people who are very, very pleasant. And sometimes you get people who are not so pleasant. And you need to learn to curb your personality around those individuals. So I really credit them for allowing me to do that. And I learned a lot from that. But I love people. And I've learned, you're watching somebody's face, you can tell when they're glazed over and they go like, I didn't get that. So I'm thinking, okay, now it's my job to take another direction around here and let's try this and see if that doesn't work for you. And dang, after all these years, I've become pretty good at recognizing something like that. So getting in there, showing somebody, and I know even for myself, I'm a visual learner. So I can try to read something, and even though people try to write something very clearly, sometimes I'm just not getting it. But if you show me and I have an opportunity to practice that, then I've got it. And I understand that very, very well. So we'll try several different aspects to get around it and work from there.
Yeah. For people who are fortunate enough to learn from you in class, and you can get that sort of feedback from seeing their eyes glaze over or that light of recognition. And yet some of your videos that we have in the Long Thread Media library are some of the most patient ones we have. So people are just kind of getting a sense of your personality, but you've had to anticipate how they will learn without being able to get that sort of reciprocal relationship.
It's true. And I think people would probably say that they hate to hear themselves on a recording. And I'm exactly the same way. So I don't like the way I sound. And yet people say, oh, you know what? You have a very calming way of doing this. And I'm going to share with listeners a story that I laugh about. A woman came up to me at the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival, and she had a very thick French accent. And she says, I'd just like to say how much I appreciate your videos and things like that I've purchased in the past. And she said, I've learned so much from it. She said, I have it on my computer. And she says, I often take you to bed with me on my computer. And she says, you lull me off to sleep. I thought, wow, that is quite the compliment. So I do laugh about things like that. But yeah, I like working with Long Thread Media. And I'll share with you, Anne, Anita Osterhag came in and we did our rug video, and I'm showing people how the threads are building up within the rug. And as you treadle it this way and that way and doing it on opposite, the colors should fall into place. And this is how to recognize them. And in the recording process, you're trying to be very professional about the whole thing. And I looked down at the fabric and I made a treadling error.
Oops.
So rather than just say, cut, I go, now put your finger right here. I want to get the camera on here. Now you can see that I've got a little bit of the warp thread showing through. I obviously have made a treadling, and this is how you fix it. So there was never a break. We just went with the whole flow as if it was actually intentional. I had no intentions of making treadling errors, but you know what? That's going to happen at home too.
Right.
And so what an opportunity to say, and this is how we fix it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you have to be present enough to recognize that you've made a mistake, because I can't tell you the number of times when something comes off the loom and we think, oh, can we just put a little...
Don't you hate that? Of course, you've cut it off the loom.
Right.
And there it's glaring right at you.
Right.
Nobody else sees it, but your eye goes to it constantly. And at some point, I think you just got to forgive yourself and just say, hey, things happen. Every once in a while, you find a bone in the fish fillet, you know? And so pick it out and just keep going. It's delicious.
A friend of mine wove a beautiful set of napkins as a housewarming gift, and she handed it over to another weaver and said, here you go. I made a mistake there and there and there, and pointed out every single one.
Yeah. My mother was like that. My mother was chef trained in London.
Oh, wow.
And she apologized for every meal that she put on our table. It wasn't quite up to her standards. And as a hungry teenager, I didn't care. It was all delicious. Yeah. So I think we're just very critical about what we do. And you just got to give yourself permission sometimes to make mistakes and learn from them. Oh my gosh, if it was perfect every single time, what would you learn? But if you make those mistakes and you go like, and this is how we're going to learn to correct it. And maybe you find several different ways that you are going to correct it, and one works better than another. Look at how valuable that was.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, speaking of teaching, I don't know if I would say that she's your most famous student, but I think that the most famous partnership is that you have spent a lot of time weaving and teaching and been in business and in practice with your daughter, Sarah.
Oh, yeah. I am so proud of her. Oh,
yeah.
I'm going to choke up.
Right. Yeah.
I have 3 daughters. The other 2 came along, and they're very, very grateful and appreciative at Christmas time and birthdays when they get a rag rug or they get something else. But Sarah, she really took to it.
Yeah. And so she, after the Mannings closed, I will also speak with Sarah, but she sort of took the lead in starting a new school. And so she became your studio lead
Oh, she did.
Yeah.
And she and her husband have Redstone Glen, and I am just so proud of both of them
Hmm.
because I'm looking when Manning's closed, I'm looking at my life and I'm thinking, I'm in my late 50s. I still have a few more years that I need to do this. Sarah is in her 30s at this point, and she had worked with me in the studio, and she said, let's do this.
Hmm.
I love what I'm doing, and I think we can make a go of this. And with a little bit of guidance from you, and they've done a tremendous job with this. And they're taking Redstone Glen in many actually different facets than what we did at the Mannings.
Hmm.
Every business has their way of doing things, but my goodness, she is now taking these wonderful trips all around the world and taking other fiber enthusiasts to
Hmm.
Japan and to Norway and soon into Switzerland and going all over. And her bubbly personality just lends itself, let's go try this or let's try. And it's great. And of course, Dustin, he is coming to this from a completely different background. He was a professional soccer player, and now he's the owner of Bluster Bay Shuttles.
Wow.
So he has an opportunity to work with his hands like we do, but in woodworking and making a shuttle that I am really happy to hold in my hand. I had purchased many Bluster Bay shuttles in the past, but when the previous owner decided to close the doors, it's like, oh, what are we going to do? Sarah and Dustin bought the company, and he is making shuttles the same way with the same tradition, and they're just great. So the two of them are really quite a partnership. They're doing great things.
I'm curious about teaching because, one is not always at one's best as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder what it was like teaching your daughter to weave and having this become something that the two of you shared.
Oh, I have a great story for that. You're a teenager and you're at that awkward stage of your life. And now we're looking at further education, what we're going to do. So Sarah spent the first year at Savannah College of Art and Design. And she went down there, and I thought, well, could you go any further away from home? She's going to get out of the house from mom and dad. Mm-hmm. And then she thought about where she wanted to go with her career. And she says, I'm going to come back to Pennsylvania, but still, I'm going to go to Edinburgh University, which is up near Lake Erie. And so for listeners that know the state of Pennsylvania, we're located in South Central Pennsylvania on the Maryland line, and Erie is way up in the further corners again. So she goes into class and she's looking at her schedule and she goes, when I sign up for these classes, there is a fiber opportunity here in a fiber class. I'll just sign up for that. I should ace that. That would be an easy class to take. And she goes in there, and the instructor was not necessarily all that interested in fiber art. She had a fine art degree, and she taught fine arts, but she knew enough. And she's going down through the list of students, and she sees Sarah Knisely. Oh, you wouldn't happen to be related to Tom Knisely, would you? And it's like, oh, dang, I can't get away from this no matter what. And she did great, and she was doing some really fun things at the university and having a lot of fun with that. And when she was finished with that, she came join me again, and we worked at the Mannings together. And I'm at this stage of my life and where I can say, if I close my eyes tomorrow for the last time, it's going to go on. It's good.
Wow.
I've done my job. She can take care of it.
That sort of hand-to-hand family teaching relationship, that's something that really ties you back to those historic coverlets that you fell in love with as well.
Oh.
Because those folks were probably learning from a family member as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes you have generational things. And let me tell you, I think 200 years ago, we had the same sort of family thing where you have a teenager and go like, there is no way that I'm going to do that. Or if you look a little bit later on and you think like, oh, well, you might have wanted a coverlet on your bed, but I certainly don't want a coverlet on my bed. I don't want something that has a center seam. I want something that can be made in a factory. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of young people are the same way. They're looking at modern things. They don't want old-timey things. And so it's my job, I think, to just get out there and just let people see the joys of this. And so I really embrace any opportunity I can get out and demonstrate this. And recently, my wife and I were down in Florida demonstrating at a historic site. and I was spinning.
Yes.
And these young kids were coming through, their second graders. And as they were leaving to get back onto the bus to go back to school, the director of the historic park said to this little fella, she said, "Did you have a good time?" "Oh my goodness, yes, I had a wonderful time. I dipped candles and I saw how soap was made and I saw this guy spinning yarn and it was a dude." And I thought, wow, I'm so glad she shared that with me because, often you don't think about a guy sitting out there on the porch spinning. It's
Right.
usually sort of like a gender thing where,
Right.
women did this, but this little guy was really impressed. And he also was looking at I know who he was. He was looking at that spinning wheel. And as the treadle goes down, it makes the wheel go around. And when the wheel goes around, then the drive band makes this flyer. And I learned today that Leonardo da Vinci designed the flyer. He went home with so much information,
Right.
but he was really interested in the mechanics. And I thought,
Yeah.
a little Tommy Knisely
Yes.
at 14 was interested in the mechanics of a spinning wheel, never thinking he's going to make his entire career out of doing this. And it's been a fun ride.
Yeah.
I love this journey.
Do you still have the spinning wheel?
You know what? I do.
Ooh.
I do. So Sarah's going to get it eventually. But
Right.
Listeners are going to say, oh, yeah, I've had a number of spinning wheels too. They come in and out of the house. And I could never get rid of that
No, it's
first
special.
wheel. It's
Mhm.
special.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, spinning wheels are still coming in and out of the house.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, what makes one come in and what makes one go?
I'm thinking, I think I would enjoy spinning on that. But now I've done other things. And for this man who absolutely loves spinning on antique equipment and fixing it and getting it back into working condition, my wife came home with an electric spinning wheel and I was building my wall. I was not going to like it. And I just have to tell you, I love it.
They're pretty fun.
They're really fun. They really are. And they travel well.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I can put that in my lunch bag and off I go.
Yes. Well, something else that you weren't going to ever do was weave on a rigid heddle.
Oh my gosh, no. Oh no. And you're a rigid heddle weaver.
I am.
You love rigid heddle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was not going to do that.
But then, and I'm sort of telling a story because the most recent Little Looms magazine and the one before that, you talk about how something big had to come along to convince you that you liked rigid heddle weaving.
Yeah, let me tell you all about this because the name of the article is Never Say Never.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, Anne, I'm a little snooty about this. I weave on real looms. I am not having anything at all to do with rigid heddles. Sarah can do that. She teaches lots of people. They are having fun with this. It is going to be marvelous, and they're doing great things with that. But I am not going to be weaving on a rigid heddle loom. Mm-hmm. And then I was at an art show, and I had some of my rugs displayed. And a woman came up to me and she said, "Oh, I know all about this." I said, "You do? Tell me a story." And I'm thinking, okay, I've heard this before. You made rag strips and you helped Granny do this on your Union rug loom. Mm-hmm. And no, she made the rag strips. But they did something called working on a bumper loom.
Bumper?
What do you mean a bumper loom? She says, well, my grandparents had this really sort of large frame, and I can remember it had wooden slats in it and there were little holes in it. My grandfather would spend like the day threading this loom up where you'd put a thread through a hole and then one in a slot and the next thread went in a hole in a slot. And we stretched it out in our basement between the beams in the basement. And she's telling me this. I'm thinking, it's a rigid heddle. It's a rigid heddle. This is like the craziest thing. How big was this? Well, it's about 18, 20 inches high and it's 36 inches wide. And we all did it. I lived in like this little coal mining community and everybody did this in the wintertime. I said, well, how did you do it? And she said, well, my aunts would be on either side of that frame and they would lift it up, and my job was to pitch the ball of rags through and they would adjust it. And then my aunts would move forward in unison and whack it up against the rug. And we kept going up and down with this. I thought, oh my gosh, this is a giant rigid heddle. I need to know more about this. And Cindy's looking at me and she's kind of like, what are you doing over there? You've been talking to that woman for 25 minutes about this. And I realized, I thought, I'm just going to invite myself over to this woman's house
Absolutely.
because she had the rigid heddle.
Wow.
Her father was about ready to throw it on the burn pile
Oh my
and get rid
gosh.
of it. And she said, Dad, I'd love it. And she took it home. She has it over the fireplace as a nice remembrance of her childhood. And sure enough, and it is a rigid heddle loom that was made from a packing crate. It's got little bits of white paint flecking off of this. It is a relic. And then interviewed her. I thought I need to know more about her for this article that I want to write for Little Looms. And so I was telling another friend about it, and she goes, oh yeah, she said, my family did that too. We're all Slovaks, and that's the way we wove rag rugs. We couldn't afford a loom. So,
Wow.
the kids sometimes made this in shop. Granny would say, can you make this on? Sure, yeah, I'm in shop class. I'll make you a bumper loom. And so I thought, oh my God, now here's two people. And so my friend Margie is visiting friends out in the Pittsburgh area, and she calls me. Cindy and I are driving in the car, and she calls me up and she said, I am currently at a flea market, and there's one of those bumper looms here, and they want $50 for it. Do you want it? Yes. And so she said, I'll bring it home. So for $50, and she hauled it all the way home from Pittsburgh. And sure enough, it's a rigid heddle. Oh my gosh, I have had so much fun with this. I have to admit, it has really come around to give me a good bite and say, don't ever say you're not going to do something, because someday you might have to eat your words.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Oh my gosh.
It's huge. That's like the size of a small child.
It is. Yeah. And it's heavy. And so just to set the thing up, it's not like working with an Ashford or a Kronsky or a Schacht rigid heddle. This thing is heavy, and it takes two grown people to operate it. But what listeners need to do is get a copy of Little Looms and read the article. It actually was so extensive that I had to write two. So there's part 1 and part 2. So make sure you get both copies and read the story for yourself.
Yes, it's spring and summer 2025.
Fantastic.
Yes. What year is it? 2025.
2025.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to picture being a young school child and coming across the famous Tom Knisely. Sorry, Tom, I know you're blushing, but the famous Tom Knisely demonstrating spinning and weaving in Florida, far from where you learned. Tell me about, getting out there and demonstrating.
Well, I have to tell you a little bit about where we go and demonstrate this too. I'm going to put a plug in for something that most Northerners would say, you can't say that. The place is called Cracker Country.
Oh, my.
And I, from the North, thought that this was a real derogatory term to call somebody a cracker. If you're a Florida cracker, you are very proud. That is your tradition of farming. You are like a Florida cowboy. And so what I learned is these fellas would just go out with these cattle that are running wild in the Florida wilderness. And to keep them sort of contained, because there's no fencing, you're using a bullwhip and you're cracking that whip. And so they became Florida crackers. Well, prominent Florida family, this gentleman, I want to say grandfather or great-grandfather was actually the governor of Florida at one point. But they're in a position where they can collect buildings from all over the state of Florida and bring them to the Florida State Fairgrounds. They have about 40 acres that they have brought these buildings in. So we have a school building. We have a country store. We have a typical Florida cracker house, a post office, a printing press, a caboose. You can imagine it's almost like a little Williamsburg.
Yeah.
But everything depicting Florida in the 1890s when they were starting to make a boom. In Florida, the railroads are coming in. So we have many, many volunteers that come in. I would say, without exaggeration, 50 to 60 people will show up during the fair in February and depict what it's like. So we're all dressing in period costuming and showing people what it's like. But then we also have school groups that come in. And there is nothing greater than to see the eyes of these little kids. And they get to come in and turn a butter churn and turn whipped cream into butter. And then you smear it on a saltine, and there is nothing more enjoyable. And I had a father come up to me and he said, "See my son eating that cracker?" He said, "I did that when I was in the fourth grade. My
Wow.
teacher brought me in here and I had butter on a cracker."
Wow. What is
So,
this place called?
well, it's at the Florida State Fairgrounds in
Okay.
Tampa,
Mhm.
and it's called Cracker Country.
Cracker Country. Okay.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
got to come to Cracker Country and get butter on your cracker.
Wow. Yeah. And of
Yeah.
course, there's Florida Cracker sheep as well, which are a heritage breed.
Oh, yeah. It's a heritage breed. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
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 So it's a lot of fun. And just to get out there and demonstrate in some capacity, I don't know, is this legit? But we often take a loom along and we put
Oh,
on a 20-yard warp and we weave dish towels and demonstrate weaving at Cracker Country for that.
sure.
And when we're done at the end of our segment, a couple weeks later, we got 20 dish towels.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's definitely different from folks who come to take a class with you, that you're going out
Oh,
to
yeah.
meet folks where they are.
Absolutely. Go out to meet where they are. And some of them had no idea. And people come from all over, like us, snowbirding. You're going
Right.
to Florida in the wintertime when it's really cold up north.
Mhm.
But I had a woman came up to me. I was weaving that day and I'm weaving along. And she said, "Oh, my grandparents wove."
Mhm.
And again, typically I cut rags and we did this.
Right.
And I got the most wonderful story about how her great grandfather came over in Sweden. They
Mhm.
ran out of land. There's
Oh.
nothing left. What is he going to do? He's 17 years old. He got passage on a ship and he came to Wisconsin
Mhm.
and settled in Wisconsin, met her grandmother. The family started. But you know what? One of the cousins still has the loom
Mhm.
that he wove on. He was trained in Sweden as a weaver.
Oh.
But when he got here, he had some of his tools and things, but had a loom built and he was weaving.
Wow.
So, yeah, you just meet some of the most wonderful people and you get all kinds of good information. And all the time that she's telling me this, I'm either sticking it in my head or grabbing a piece of paper and a pen and I'm writing things
Sure.
down because, hey, it's good information
Mhm.
for little looms
Right. Yeah.
and hand woven
Right.
and other things. And say, you gotta spread the word. So,
But I wonder, does it feel a little bit like a busman's holiday that you're a teacher for your regular job and then you're going to demonstrate as well?
you would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would think so. But, it's a little bit different. And I'm meeting another audience. When people are coming to class, they definitely are coming because they have an interest.
Right.
And then sometimes I just run into people and said, "Look, I came to the Florida State Fair for a corn dog and to ride the rides. And I ran into this thing and how cool is this?
Right.
This is really awesome." And you know what? I think I had a relative that once wove
That connection.
that
Yeah.
connection. And as soon as you hook them,
Right.
yeah. Now at Cracker Country, we are dressed in period clothing.
Mhm.
But, if I have an opportunity to just go out and spin and weave and things like that, I think it's good for people to see that here I am in my, my Levi jeans and,
Sure.
and the shirt, and it's modern.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
have to, it doesn't have to be old timey.
Right.
You can do awesome things in regular street clothes that
Sure.
you would wear. So, yeah. If you haven't done this, folks, just throw a spinning wheel in the car, throw a loom in the car and go out there and you'd be surprised on how much it means to other people to see this.
Mhm.
But I guarantee you'll come home with stories that are far greater
Yes.
than what you have put out. It's a real reward.
That's a wonderful story to know that you can make a connection not only with folks, because I think for a lot of us, there's a special feeling when you are around people who are sharing the same passion that you are,
Mhm.
but putting yourself out there to share that passion with somebody and that you're actually getting a connection back is pretty special.
It's really special, especially if you're asked to, set up in the local
Mhm.
shopping mall.
Mhm.
People don't expect that.
That's true. Well, I really like that spin on it because I think a lot of folks feel like they're kind of lonely in their craft, that other folks don't really understand why we do what we do. And you're talking about just sort of shifting and looking at it a different way.
You are absolutely right. When you think about, you are in your home and you've got a 60-inch 8-shaft Lamocra loom
Mhm.
and it doesn't fold,
Right.
you are pretty much stuck at home.
Mhm.
Where if you have something that's portable, even a little table loom or a portable spinning wheel, and you can put it in there and you can go out and you can travel with it. That's another reason to have something portable that you can get out there and demonstrate that. Plus the fact it's just fun to get together with like-minded people.
That's true.
So as a knitter, Anne, I'm sure you probably got together with 12 friends at Panera and sat there and had a cup of coffee and a cookie and just chit-chatted. And those type of stores have always been good for that. But to go and do this in an unlikely place is great. Yeah, it's really rewarding. Please, I promise you're going to love doing this and then coming home and share with your family what you experienced.
Yeah.
Also talk to your kids, talk to your grandchildren about these type of things. Or even if you don't have a family member, adopt one. My wife and I are fortunate enough that we have collected a number of pieces of equipment over the years. And sometimes we have extra stuff. If you're just starting weaving, if you're just starting spinning, you're trying to get as much as you possibly can at this point. So you have an ankle loom, or you have rigid handle loom, and you have all those things. But we've adopted a couple of kids who have an interest, but their parents are not in a position.
Right.
My dad was great. I could not drive. He put me in that truck and we went to the Mannings hand weaving school and made sure that I had exposure to all of that and anything I needed. He made sure that I had the equipment. I had the spinning wheel, but I needed the wool, the flax, and books and things like that. He really fed that. And now Cindy and I want to do that. So we've had a number of kids that we have met. Give them a drop spindle.
Right.
Do you have an old spinning wheel that you're not using? Really, you could sell it, but $50 doesn't go very far these days. Give the kid a piece of equipment. We recently had an older loom and we gave the loom away as a Christmas present.
Oh,
Stellar, you have an interest in this, and I can see in your eyes this is going to be for a long time. You really get it. You're really interested. You're studying. You're asking me questions. You want to know these things. And her parents are not in a position. It gives us joy just to put this in her lap, and her mom will drive for miles and miles and miles and to take her to other guilds and things like that. She's 15 years old.
Right.
But I know that she's going to be doing this when she's 67 years of age and said, somebody help me out.
Yeah.
So get out there, help somebody, help a kid.
In a way, what you're talking about is kind of similar to the Zanshiori and rag rugs, where something that is not currently being used to its full potential, you can shift it, whether it's put it in different hands or put it in a different lens, and all of a sudden you're bringing something that maybe wasn't appreciated and giving it sort of pride of place.
Oh, thank you for recognizing it. It's true. Yeah. And it's just good stuff to do.
Yeah. It is good stuff to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Tom, thank you so much. It's been such a delight to talk to you.
This has been fun. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.